Well, today marks the 100th day of Donald Trump's second term as president, and we're taking a look at where things stand. One of President Trump's campaign promises to oversee an end to two ongoing wars, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. But despite some temporary ceasefires, the two conflicts continue to this day. His administration held multiple meetings and phone calls with Ukrainian and Russian leaders, but has failed to convince both sides to agree to an extended ceasefire, let alone a peace deal. Now, on the Israel-Hamas war, a ceasefire held for several weeks, and during that time, there were hostage and prisoner exchanges. The ceasefire began the day before Trump's inauguration and was negotiated by Biden and Trump officials. That ceasefire, if you remember, held until March 18th when Israel launched missiles into Gaza with the U.S.'s backing. Now, for more on President Trump's foreign policies after 100 days in office, let's get to CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, first question, is the president any closer to ending these wars?
Well, Liz, first of all, I think we have to remind everybody that the United States is already deeply involved in its own shooting war, a hot war against the Houthis. And the Navy just announced they lost an F-18 Super Hornet that rolled off the hangar deck of the USS Truman in the Red Sea. But we'll put that to one side. In terms of his vow to end these wars, let's start with Ukraine. OK, so there's some reason to believe there has been progress made, at least inching toward a ceasefire, if not something more permanent. That's after President Putin said that Russia would mark a unilateral ceasefire next month to mark Victory Day. We know this has been so important to this Trump administration, specifically this week, marking 100 days. And there was a comment from Secretary of State Marco Rubio that this is going to be a critical week. And after, President Trump had that brief meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican over the weekend, the mood music has been positive. So each side's going to have to make some concessions. Russia's demanding they keep the territory they seized from Ukraine going back to 2014, including Crimea. Zelensky says, and it's no surprise, he won't accept that, but there's a growing belief he's going to have to if they want this war to end. And Trump has said in the past he doesn't have to accept that deal.
Well, let's talk about
As
Crimea
for Gaza.
here. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay. I just lost track for a moment there because we talked about Gaza too, right?
Yep.
So for Gaza, there hasn't really been a lot of palpable progress, sadly, to report in the past few weeks. We know that these talks, for what they are going on in Cairo. One of the main sticking points there is that Hamas wants to remain armed. And Israel's objective from the get-go, and I was there when it was declared, wasn't the surrender of Hamas, but the total destruction of Hamas. Again, we have to remind people, 51,300 people have been killed, including 17,400 children, according to Hamas health officials. Israeli forces say that about 1,200 people were killed in those October 7th attacks against Israel.
And now, staying with Gaza here for a moment, Charlie, President Trump proposed taking over the Gaza Strip, pitching the idea to turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. Is this even realistic? I mean, how is this being received?
Well, when it first came out about 2 months ago, I guess, something like that, 10 weeks ago, in some circles, it was just seen as deeply offensive and insensitive, especially, of course, the people of Gaza themselves, and even some of America's regional enemies. Human agencies also question the legality of deporting the Palestinian population, even temporarily, which, of course, is a violation of a long list of international treaties, including the Geneva Convention. And, of course, Palestinians are no strangers to being forced out of their homeland. But now even Trump's administration officials have walked back the idea. What might be a more serious conversation, and they are having that conversation, is about America's involvement in helping to rebuild Gaza. It's going to cost a lot of money figuring out how to house those Palestinians while they do that, rebuild those neighborhoods. There's going to be a lot of uncleared, unexploded ordnance to clear before they can return home. That's going to take billions of dollars in investment.
I want to go back to Ukraine here for a minute. They've been working to sign a minerals deal with Ukraine. Where does that stand? And how would the United States benefit from that?
Potentially, it would be a huge benefit. And a lot of people were laughing off the deal, saying, well, wait a minute, where does the United States get off trying to, suck up the the natural resources in Ukraine, but there is some progress to report there. So Ukraine's government has agreed to at least an outline of a deal, what they're calling a memorandum of intent, which would be an economic partnership between the United States and Ukraine. So that kind of goes hand in hand with an investment fund for reconstruction in Ukraine. You know, the Ukrainians don't want Americans running off with their rare earth minerals. They want to see that this is a sort of deal. Another important step. This is critical, too, and this happened in the past couple of days. The Prime Minister said there's now an agreement that the United States wouldn't seek to use those natural resources to repay the billions of dollars in aid that they've already provided throughout the war. So this would be going forward. The idea of reparations for the war that they didn't start was not sitting well with the Ukrainian people. In terms of how important it is, Ukraine is one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. May give you some indication why President Putin was interested in it. Deposits of lithium, graphite, manganese, titanium. These are all the things that we hear for modern industry. And it's a lot. A lot of the mineral deposits, and this is a big but, a lot of the mineral deposits are currently held by Russia, worth about $350 billion. And those resources are currently under Russian occupation. That is going to get sticky.
Another thing not sitting well with Ukrainians is the issue of Crimea. President Trump said that the Ukrainians may have to give Crimea up, but there's going to be some sort of peace deal here. But Charlie, if they give Crimea to the Russians, what does that signal to the rest of Europe and also China? I mean, this has major ramifications for world policy here if they let Russia take Crimea.
It really does, because the whole idea of what essentially is a land grab is and should be discouraged around the globe. You can't go in. It's not World War II. You can't just take over and occupy an area. Crimea is a little bit more tricky. It wasn't during this last round of fighting, but it was in 2014 that the Russians annexed it, and they really kind of did it without a fight. And making things more complicated, Crimea was once kind of Russian territory under the old USSR. So there is a sense that the Russians say, well, wait a minute, Crimea isn't even Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine is another thing, because a lot of people say Ukraine is part of Russia or larger Russia anyway. But Crimea itself, and if you look at where it is geographically, and I can also tell you, having been to Crimea, there are a lot of people inside Crimea that consider themselves Russian or at least, quote, Soviet. So that is a bit more difficult. But as you said, you know, China's going to be looking at this. They'll be looking at Taiwan and saying, well, wait a minute. If you're essentially rewarding Russia for what was at least ostensibly a military aggression, what's going to stop us from maybe claiming ownership over Taiwan, which the Chinese government would do? So, yes, this is a dangerous precedent going forward. I can tell you where it gets a little bit tricky is Zelensky doesn't necessarily have to accept that. Under his constitution, he might never accept it. That may not be a deal breaker, because what the Russians are looking for is an international acceptance of that annexation, primarily from the United States, hoping that the rest of the international community also takes stock in that as well. So, you know, I speak to a lot of people in in Ukraine, and little by little they're saying, look, they want the war to end. And if that's going to be the sacrificial lamb, that may be what they have to do.
All right. We'll be watching. Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much.